Pine Ridge, Colorado, September of 1885. A young woman with a limp stepped off the train with her dying sister. The mayor of the town picked up her satchel, looked her in the eye, and threw it in the mud. 30 men laughed. He smiled when he did it. 6 months later, that same man would stand in handcuffs on that same street while that same limping girl spoke his sentence in front of every soul in the territory. This is how the wheel turned. The wind off the Boston harbor in late September of 1885 carried the smell of salt and coal smoke and something else, something sharper, the first warning bite of a winter that had not yet arrived but was already crouching in the shadows of the brick row houses on Hanover Street. Inside one of those narrow houses on the third floor, in a room no larger than a horse stall, a young woman knelt beside a narrow bed and pressed her palm against her sister's forehead. The forehead was hot. Rebecca Haywood was 23 years old that autumn. Her hair the color of honey after a long summer had been pinned up that morning in a simple knot, but strands of it had worked loose over the long hours of nursing and now fell across her cheek as she leaned forward to listen to her sister's breathing. Her eyes, the deep blue of cornflowers in a high meadow, were red-rimmed from a week of broken sleep. She was small, no taller than 5'3", and her right leg, the one that had been crushed beneath the overturned coach 4 winters ago, ached with the changing weather. Lily Haywood was 12 years old. She had been a chatterbox once, the kind of child who told stories to herself while she set the table, who named every pigeon on the rooftop, who could not stop singing even when she was scolded for singing in church. Now she lay still, her chest rising and falling in shallow tugs, her cheeks flushed with fever, her lips cracked. Dr. Augustus Whitman stood in the doorway with his black bag in one hand and his hat in the other. He was a thin man of 60 with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had taught Rebecca herbcraft over the 4 years she had served as governess to his only son. He had buried her parents. He had set the bones in her ankle when she was 19 and screaming. There were few things in this world he could not say to her. "Miss Haywood," he said quietly, "I have to be honest with you." Rebecca did not turn from the bed. "How long, doctor?" 6 weeks, maybe less. The Boston winter will take her if she stays. The damp air, the coal smoke, the cold. Her lungs cannot survive another season here. He paused. She needs the dry air of the high country, Colorado, Wyoming, somewhere west of the 100th meridian, and she needs it before the snow flies. Rebecca closed her eyes. "I have $12, doctor. $12 and a satchel. I cannot afford a train ticket to the next town, let alone Colorado." The old doctor was silent for a wing moment. Then he set his hat on the small table by the door and reached into his coat. He drew out a folded letter creased and softened by many readings. "You wrote to a man," he said. "Last spring I saw the advertisement myself. I helped you compose the reply, though you would not let me read it. He answered, did he not?" Rebecca opened her eyes. In the bottom drawer of the cracked dresser beneath a stack of mended stockings, there was a letter she had not opened in 3 weeks. She had told herself she would never open it again. She had told herself the man who wrote it could not possibly be real. No man, she had told herself, would say what this man had said in his second letter. No man would mean it. She rose from the bed. Her right knee popped softly as she stood the way it always did now when the weather turned. She crossed to the dresser. She took out the letter. The paper was rough, almost coarse. The handwriting was not elegant. It was the handwriting of a man whose hands had broken horses and split logs and pulled triggers, a man who had learned his letters from a tired mother by lamplight and never had cause to refine them. But the words were clear. The words were steady. The words were these: "Miss Haywood, I received your reply. You wrote to me of your sister and of your foot and of your fear that no honest man would have you. I read your letter 3 times before I could answer it. I want you to know that a good man does not judge a tree by its bark. My mother taught me that before she died, and I have not yet found a reason to disbelieve her. Your foot does not concern me. Your sister is welcome in my home for as long as breath remains in my body. I have enclosed $200 for your fare and provision. The train will take you to Pine Ridge, Colorado. I will be there to meet you, or my brothers will, if my work prevents me. We are not wealthy people, Miss Haywood, but you and your sister will not want for food or shelter or kindness. If you have changed your mind, keep the money for your sister's care. I will not pursue you. Yours in good faith, Caleb Walker, Pine Ridge, Colorado territory. Rebecca read the letter once. Then she read it again. Then she folded it carefully along its old creases and held it against her chest and did not cry because she had learned a long time ago that crying did not solve anything, and there was nothing left to solve except the next thing and the next and the next. She turned to Dr. Whitman. I will go, she said. He nodded once. I thought you would. He sent $200 in the spring. I never spent it. I could not bring myself to. I kept thinking I should send it back. You should have spent some of it on Cole. I could not spend a strange man's money on myself. The old doctor smiled a sad and tired smile. Miss Haywood, he did not send it for himself. He sent it for you. There is a difference. Outside the window, a horse car clattered down Hanover Street, and somewhere a woman called a child indoors. And the smell of coal smoke pressed against the glass, and Rebecca Haywood, 23 years old with $12 in her purse, and a sister dying in her bed, made the second hardest decision of her life. She would go west. She did not know yet that the man who had written that letter had spent the previous winter alone in a cabin with pneumonia, lying in his bunk for 12 days, certain he was going to die, where no one would find him until spring. She did not know that he was 32 years old, that his hands shook just a little when he lifted his coffee cup, that he had not planned to advertise for a wife at all until the night he came back from town and found his father's grave already blanketed by the first snow of the season, and understood finally that he could not do another winter alone. She did not know any of this. She would not know it for many weeks. Some things you have to learn the slow way. The narrator wishes to pause here for just a moment, friend, because of what happens next is the part of the story I think on most often. There is a kind of courage that does not announce itself. It does not stand in the public square. It does not lift a flag. It is the courage of a young woman packing a satchel by candlelight, while her sister sleeps folding 3 mended dresses, 2 pairs of stockings, a Bible that belonged to her mother, and a small tin of dried yarrow she had been saving for the spring. That is the kind of courage that built this country, and it is the kind of courage that does not get spoken of in books. So let us speak of it now. She also did not know on that September night in Boston that 2,300 miles west of her, in a cabin built of white pine logs in the high country of Colorado, a man named Caleb Walker was sitting at his kitchen table by lamplight with a tin cup of black coffee in front of him, and his hand was shaking just a little, and he was reading a telegram that had come up from Pine Ridge that afternoon, and the telegram said that his bride was on the eastbound train and would arrive on the 27th of the month. She did not know that he had read the telegram 14 times. She did not know that he was afraid. But that is getting ahead of ourselves. The train ride west took 6 days. 6 days of soot and cinders and hard wooden benches of stations where the air smelled of horses and coal and the strange, dry sweetness of prairie dust the further west they went. Lily slept much of the way, curled against her sister's shoulder, breathing easier with every 100 miles of dry air. Rebecca watched the country change through the smoke-smudged window. The brick of Boston gave way to the green hills of New York, and then to the long flat farms of Ohio, and then to the great rolling sea of grass that was Iowa and Nebraska. And then on the 5th morning, she saw something she had only ever seen in lithographs. Mountains. They rose up out of the western horizon like a wall the world had built to hide something behind it. They were not green. They were blue and gray and white at the tops, where the snow already lay. They were taller than any building she had ever seen. They were taller than anything she had ever imagined. She woke Lily and pointed, and her sister, who had been so quiet for so long, drew in a small breath of wonder. "Becca," Lily whispered, "are we really going to live there?" "Yes." "Will it be very cold?" "I think so." "Will the man be kind?" Rebecca thought of the letter folded in her bodice against her heart where she had carried it for 6 days. She thought of the man who had written, "A good man does not judge a tree by its bark." "I believe so, Lily. I have to believe so." It was on the fifth afternoon, as the train climbed slowly into the foothills, that the woman in the seat across the aisle introduced herself. She was a handsome woman, perhaps 24 years of age, in a deep green traveling dress of fine wool with lace at the cuffs that had clearly cost more than Rebecca had earned in a year of governessing. Her hair was the color of polished mahogany pinned with combs of carved bone, and on her eyes were a cold, pale gray that did not quite match the warmth of her smile. She introduced herself as Margaret Ellsworth of Denver, traveling home from a visit to relatives in St. Louis, and she asked in the polite tones of a woman raised to make conversation with strangers where Rebecca was bound. "Pine Ridge," Rebecca said, "in Colorado territory." Margaret Ellsworth's smile did not change, but something behind her gray eyes did. A small light went out, and a different one came on, and she leaned forward across the aisle, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Pine Ridge. May I ask whom you go to see?" "My intended husband, Mr. Caleb Walker." Margaret Ellsworth was silent for a moment that lasted just a beat too long. "My dear girl," she said softly, "turn around. Get off this train at the next station. Use whatever money you have to go home. There are things at Walker Ridge that no letter could prepare you for. No one in my family will go near that place anymore. Do you understand me? No one." Rebecca's mouth went dry. "I do not understand you, Miss Ellsworth." "You will. That is what frightens me." She glanced over her shoulder as though afraid of being overheard, though there was no one in the seat behind her but a sleeping cattleman. "I should not have spoken. Forget what I said. I wish you well." She turned her face to the window and would not speak again for the remainder of the journey. When the conductor called Pine Ridge 2 days later, Margaret Ellsworth did not so much as turn her head as Rebecca and Lily gathered their satchel and walked the long aisle to the door. The narrator wonders if you have noticed something. There are 2 letters spoken of in this story so far. The one Caleb Walker wrote, which said, "A good man does not judge a tree by its bark," and the one Margaret Ellsworth almost wrote it with her warning, which said, "Turn around." The whole of what is to come can be heard in the difference between those 2 letters. One was written by a man who chose to see. The other was written by a woman who had been taught to look away. Keep that in mind, friend. We will return to it. The Pine Ridge Depot was a single small building of weathered planks at the edge of a town that did not look like much, even by frontier standards. There was a main street of packed dirt, a livery, 2 saloons, a general store, a bank, a small white church at the far end, and a town hall with a stone foundation and a brass bell mounted in a wooden tower. The mountains rose up behind the town near enough that the first ridge cast its shadow across the rooftops by mid-afternoon. The air was thin and cold and tasted of pine. Rebecca stepped down from the train with Lily's hand in hers. Their satchel was set on the platform beside them by a porter who tipped his cap and moved on. The train hissed and groaned and pulled away, and the noise of it faded down the valley. And then there was a great quiet broken only by the wind and the distant hammering of someone shoeing a horse at the livery. No one came to meet them. Rebecca stood on the platform for 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. Lily sat on the satchel and watched a stray dog cross the dirt street. The shadow of the first ridge crept closer to the depot. It was at the end of the first hour that the men began to gather. They came out of the saloons, first 2 and 3 at a time, then from the general store, then from the livery, until there were perhaps 30 of them standing in a loose half circle in front of the town hall watching the depot. They did not speak. They watched. Rebecca did not understand at first what they were watching, and then with a slow, cold dread, she understood. They were watching her. They were watching her foot. She had been standing on the platform for an hour. Her right leg had stiffened in the cold. When she shifted her weight, the limp was visible. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was somewhere past 50, broad and heavy in the middle, with a red face and a black mustache, trimmed too neat for a frontier town. He wore a brown wool suit that did not quite fit him, and a gold watch chain across his vest, and a pair of polished boots that had never seen real work. He carried himself with the small, puffed self-importance of a man who had been told too many times that he was the most important man in the room. "Well, well," he said loud enough for the whole street to hear. "If this is not the Walker Bride after all." "The famous mail-order Walker Bride." Rebecca said nothing. "The boys had a wager going," the man continued. He turned to the crowd. "Did I not say she would come, gentlemen? Did I not say it? Old Caleb Walker is so desperate for a wife, he will take damaged goods, sight unseen." There was laughter, not all of it. Some of the men in the back of the crowd shifted uncomfortably and looked at the ground. But enough of them laughed. Enough! Lily stood up from the satchel and pressed against her sister's side. "My name is Mayor Horace Bradley," the red-faced man said, walking forward and stopping 6 feet from the platform. He did not offer his hand. "I am the duly elected representative of this fine community, and I regret to inform you, miss, that there has been a small misunderstanding between you and Mr. Walker. He will not be coming for you today. He never had any intention of coming for you. The gentleman lives 40 miles up that mountain road, and 40 miles is a long way to ride for damaged goods." He smiled when he said it. That was the thing the narrator wants you to remember. He smiled. Now, the good people of Pine Ridge are not entirely without charity. There is a stage that runs back to Denver every other Tuesday. If you and your little sister would care to wait 3 days at the boarding house, and if you have the means to pay for your room, I can perhaps speak to the proprietor about a fair rate. Otherwise, I am afraid the depot platform is as much hospitality as Pine Ridge has to offer young women of your particular condition. He bent down. He picked up Rebecca's satchel. He looked at it for a moment with theatrical curiosity weighing it in his hand. Then he tossed it casually into the wet mud of the street. The laughter was louder this time. Lily flinched. Rebecca did not. The narrator wants you to mark this moment, friend. Mark the man's face. Mark the gold watch chain across his vest. Mark the polished boots. Mark the laugh of the crowd. Because 6 months from this afternoon, this same man on this same street in front of this same town hall will stand in handcuffs, while a young woman with a limp speaks to him in front of every soul in the territory. The wheel turns slow, but it turns. Mark it. Rebecca Haywood stepped down from the platform. Her right leg failed her on the second step, and she caught herself on the rail, but she did not fall. She walked across the dirt. She stooped. She lifted her satchel from the mud. She wiped it clean against her own dress. She straightened. She lifted her chin, and she walked with her sister's hand in hers past Mayor Horace Bradley and his crowd of laughing men, past the saloons and the livery and the bank, to a wooden bench in front of the closed assayer's office, where she sat down with Lily on her lap and said very softly in a voice meant only for her sister, "We are going to be all right. Do you hear me, Lily? We are going to be all right." The shadow of the first ridge had now reached the assayer's office. The wind off the mountains had a knife in it. 40 miles up that mountain road, in a kitchen built of white pine logs by a man who had been dead for 6 years, Caleb Walker was running. He had ridden into the North Camp at dawn that morning to settle a dispute between 2 foremen over a cut allotment, and he had meant to be back at Walker Ridge by noon, and he would have been except that one of his teamsters had taken a chain across the leg when a load of timber shifted on the haul road, and Caleb had stayed to set the bone himself because it was 3 hours to a doctor, and a man could lose a leg in 3 hours. By the time the teamster was stable and resting, the sun was past 3, and that was when his brother Wyatt came up the road from Pine Ridge. At a hard gallop, his bay lathered and pulled the horse up so sharp that gravel sprayed the porch. "Caleb," Wyatt said. He was the youngest, 26, lean and wire strong, with the same chestnut hair as his brother, and the green eyes that came down from their mother. He swung off the horse before it had stopped moving. Caleb, it is Bradley. He intercepted the depot. Caleb Walker stood up from where he had been kneeling beside the teamster. He was not a man who shouted. He was not a man who cursed. He was a man, his foreman would later say, who got very quiet when he was angry, and the quieter he got, the worse it was for whatever had earned the anger. He stood up, and he was very quiet. How long ago? 2 hours, maybe. I rode out the moment I heard. Silas is saddling fresh horses at the home place. He says we ride together. She is alone with the child. Alone on the depot platform, and then in the street. Bradley ran his mouth in front of half the town. He threw her satchel in the mud. Caleb closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, his hand had stopped shaking. He had lived his whole life in this country. He had buried his father at 26 and his mother 3 days later, and he had not wept where his brothers could see. He had spent 12 days alone in a fever last winter and had not asked for help even when he could not stand. He had carried Walker Ridge on his back for 6 years without complaint. There were not many things left in this world that could move him. A young woman alone on a depot platform with a child, while a fat man threw her belongings in the mud, was one of them. Saddle the gray, he said. Already done. Tell Silas we ride. Now. The two brothers rode south down the mountain road at a pace that would have killed a lesser horse. The autumn light slanted long and gold through the pines. The wind smelled of snow that was still a week away, but coming. Caleb did not speak. Wyatt knew better than to make him. Silas Walker was waiting at the fork in the road. He was the middle brother, 29 years old, the tallest of the three, with the long, sun-bleached hair of a man who lived outdoors and the gray eyes of a man who had watched too many friends die. He carried a long scar down his left cheek given to him by a timber thief's knife 3 winters past. He had ridden with the 7th Cavalry under General Crook in the summer of 76 and 77, and he had come back from that war with things in his head that did not let him sleep on full moons. Of the 3 brothers, he was the one who said the least and noticed the most. How bad? Caleb asked. Bad enough. Silas swung his bay around to ride beside them. Old May heard it from the freight man. Bradley made a whole show of it. Half the town watched. And she is still there. She is still there, Issue. Caleb nodded once. They rode. The narrator wants to ask you a small thing, friend, before we continue. When was the last time you made a hard ride to set right a wrong that someone had done to a person you had not yet met? Most men live a whole life and never have to. Some men live a whole life and never would. But there is a particular kind of man, and you may know 1 or 2 of them in your own life, who will set down whatever he is carrying and saddle a horse and ride 60 miles in a single afternoon for the simple reason that it is the right thing to do. Caleb Walker was such a man. So were his brothers. The story we are telling is in part the story of how a young woman with a limp came to find herself on the worst afternoon of her life, with 3 such men riding down a mountain toward her. The light was already beginning to fail when the 3 Walker brothers rode into Pine Ridge. They came down the main street at a slow walk, 3 abreast, their horses still steaming from the long descent. They did not speak. They did not need to. Caleb rode in the middle on a tall gray gelding. Silas rode on his right on a bay. Wyatt rode on his left on a chestnut. They were each over 6.5 feet tall in the saddle, and the lengthening shadows made them look taller still. The men in front of the saloons noticed first. Word ran ahead of them down the street the way a brush fire runs ahead of the wind. By the time they reached the town hall, the laughter had stopped. Mayor Horace Bradley was on the boardwalk in front of the bank in conversation with a thin man in a black coat. He turned as the riders approached, and his red face went a shade redder, and he tried for a smile that did not quite take. Mr. Walker, he called, we were not expecting you down today. Caleb did not answer. He did not even look at the mayor. His eyes moved across the half-empty street and found the small figure on the bench in front of the assayer's office. A young woman in a navy traveling dress, her hair coming undone, a child asleep with her head in the woman's lap. The woman was watching him, watching all three of them. Caleb dismounted. The narrator will tell you that there is a thing, certain men do a thing that does not require any words that says everything that needs to be said. Caleb Walker did that thing. He swung down from the gray. He handed the reins to Wyatt without looking. He walked down the boardwalk and across the dirt street, and his boots were steady on the ground that had so recently held his bride's mud-streaked satchel, and he did not turn his head 1 inch to acknowledge the fat man on the bank steps. He walked past Bradley as though the mayor were a fence post. He stopped 6 feet from the bench. He took off his hat. "Miss Haywood," he said. His voice was lower than she had imagined, slow, quiet. The voice of a man who did not waste words because he had spent too many winters with no one to spend them on. "Mr. Walker," Rebecca said, "I am late. I am very sorry I am late." "You came." "Ma'am, I would have come if I had to crawl." Lily stirred in her sister's lap and opened her eyes and saw the tall man with the dark hat in his hand, and she did not flinch the way she usually did at strange men. She studied him with the slow, grave attention of a sick child who has learned to read faces. Caleb knelt down in the dirt at the bench so that he was below her eye level and not above it. "You must be Lily," he said. "Yes, sir. My horse at home is named Snowdrop. She likes carrots better than apples, and she likes apples better than people mostly. I was hoping you might help me decide if she is being fair about that." Lily considered this very seriously. "I think she is not being fair." "That is what I thought. I am glad you came to help me sort it out." Behind him, Mayor Horace Bradley had recovered enough breath to speak. "Now hold on, Walker. There has been some confusion here. The young lady arrived without proper notice, and there has been a small misunderstanding about the suitability of the arrangement given certain physical considerations that were perhaps not made fully clear in correspondence." Caleb did not turn around. He stood up slowly from his knee. He set his hat back on his head. He turned, and now he did look at the mayor, and his hazel eyes were the color of whiskey held up to a low fire, and there was nothing warm in them at all. "Mayor Bradley, Mr. Walker, you threw this lady's bag in the mud. There has been a misunderstanding. You threw her bag in the mud, sir, in front of her sister, in front of half the town. I have heard this from 3 witnesses on the ride down. Mr. Walker, I assure you, you will not assure me of anything." Caleb's voice did not rise. It did the opposite. It dropped a half tone and the street went very quiet around it. "You will go home, Mayor. You will go home tonight, and you will think very carefully about the next time you choose to publicly insult a guest who has come to this town under my name. And you will ask yourself whether you wish to make a habit of it, because I have a long memory, Mayor, and my brothers have longer ones." Silas had not dismounted. He sat the bay easy with his rifle across the saddlebow, not pointed at anything, just resting there, the way a man's rifle rests when he is not particularly worried about who sees it. The scar down his cheek caught the last of the afternoon light. He looked at Mayor Bradley the way a wolf looks at a sheep that has wandered too far from the flock. He did not say a word. Mayor Bradley discovered suddenly that he had business elsewhere. Caleb turned back to the bench. "Miss Haywood, may I carry your bag?" "Yes." "May I help you to the wagon? I have brought it down with bedding for your sister. I thought she might rest better than on horseback." "It is a long road up to the home place." "Yes, 40 miles. We will not make it tonight. We will camp at the creek crossing. I have a tent for you and the child. My brothers and I will sleep under the stars. There is plenty of food and we have warm blankets. You will be safe with us. I want you to know that. You will be safe with us." He said it the way another man might have said the sun rises in the east, plain, as a thing that did not require argument. Rebecca looked up at him. She had been holding herself together for a great many hours, and she had been holding herself together a great many years before that, and she found suddenly that the holding was harder than she had expected it would be. Her eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall, but they filled. "Mr. Walker." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you for coming." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for waiting." He bent down. He gathered the satchel in one large hand. With the other, he offered her his arm. It was the first time in 4 years that anyone had offered Rebecca Haywood an arm to lean on. She took it. She rose. Her right leg held her, and she walked with her sister's hand in her free one, and the tall stranger's arm beneath her other across the dirt street that had so recently held the laughter of 30 men. And the men were gone now, melted back into their saloons and their stores, and the only sound in Pine Ridge, as the three Walker brothers and the woman and the child climbed into the wagon, was the wind off the mountains and the slow creak of harness and the small, clear voice of a 12-year-old girl asking in a tone of careful wonder, "Mr. Walker, is your horse really named Snowdrop?" "Yes, Miss Lily. That is a very pretty name. My mother named her before she passed. My mother said every horse on a hard road deserves a soft name. She said it kept the road kinder." The narrator does not know about you, friend, but the narrator believes Caleb Walker's mother was a woman worth knowing. The wagon turned at the end of the main street and rolled north onto the mountain road, and the shadow of the first ridge swallowed it whole, and Pine Ridge was left behind in the gathering dusk, with its saloons and its bank and its red-faced mayor standing in the window of his second-story office watching the wagon disappear, his fingers white on the windowsill, a small vein pulsing at his temple. He turned to the thin man in the black coat who had not moved from his chair through the entire encounter. "Send the telegram," Mayor Horace Bradley said. "Send it tonight. Tell Catherine her nephew has actually gone and done it. Tell her we move forward with the plan." The thin man nodded once and rose to leave. "And Sheriff Mercer," "Yes, Mayor. Tell Catherine to bring the judge." The first night on the trail, they camped at the creek crossing as Caleb had promised. Wyatt built the fire. Silas tended the horses and set a snare line of habit at the edge of the willows. Caleb pitched a small canvas tent for Rebecca and Lily and laid out fresh wool blankets inside it. He cooked venison and potatoes in a cast-iron skillet over the fire and made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and he did not sit down to eat until the woman and the child had been served first. Lily, fed and warm for the first time in many weeks, fell asleep on her bedroll with a piece of bread still in her hand. Rebecca sat by the fire with a tin cup of coffee in her hands and looked across the flames at the three brothers and tried to understand what had happened to her life. It was Silas who finally spoke. He had not said a word the whole afternoon, and he did not say much now, but what he said carefully. "Ma'am, about the mayor." "Yes." "That was not about you, was it not?" "No, ma'am, that was about Caleb and Walker Ridge. Bradley has been trying to get our land for 5 years. He sees you as a threat to that. I want you to know it before you go up the mountain. The trouble that was in the street today did not start with you. It will not end with you. But you have walked into the middle of it, and you have a right to know." Rebecca looked into the fire for a long moment. "Mr. Walker," she said, "Caleb, your letter said you were not a wealthy man." Caleb was silent. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. Wyatt and Silas glanced at each other across the fire the way brothers do. "I said we were not wealthy people, ma'am." "That is true. We are not. We have land. We have timber. We have cattle. We have men who work for us. None of those things are wealth. They are work. They are obligation. They are things you can lose in a single bad winter. My father came west in 1858 with $50 and a mule. He built what we have. When he died 6 years ago on the very pass we came down today, he left it to the three of us. We have kept it. That is all. We have kept it." He looked up across the fire. The flames moved in his hazel eyes. "I did not mean to mislead you, Miss Haywood. I will tell you all of it when we are home. There are things I would rather tell you in our own kitchen than at a campfire on the trail. May I ask that of you?" "Yes." "Thank you." The fire popped. Up on the ridge above them, a coyote called, and another answered far down the valley. Lily sighed in her sleep and turned over. The wind moved in the high pines. The narrator will leave you here for tonight, friend, At the edge of a fire on a mountain road, the young woman drinking strong coffee, and three brothers across the flames, and a sleeping child, and a future none of them can yet see. The wagon will roll north in the morning. The mountains are still ahead. The home place at Walker Ridge is still a day and a half away. There are things waiting there that Rebecca Haywood does not yet know. There is a kitchen built of white pine logs by a man who has been dead 6 years. There is a housekeeper named Hannah Mae Holloway with a secret she has been carrying for 5 years and cannot carry much longer. There is a will signed by Jonathan Walker on his deathbed with a clause that comes due in just over 4 months. And there is a telegram racing east at this very moment from a thin man in a black coat to a woman in a Denver parlor announcing that the trap has been sprung, that the bride has arrived, and that the time has come to bring down the house of Walker. But all of that is for tomorrow. Tonight by the creek crossing, a child sleeps for the first time in many months without coughing, and her sister lifts a tin cup of coffee to her lips with a hand that has finally stopped trembling. And across the fire, a quiet man in a worn flannel shirt watches her without quite watching, and the words his mother taught him many years ago move quietly through his mind like a creek under thin ice. A good man does not judge a tree by its bark. A good man does not judge a tree by its bark. A good man does not judge a tree by its bark. Stay close, friend. The morning is coming, and the mountains, as Rebecca Haywood is about to learn, keep their own counsel about who belongs and who does not. Morning came to the high country the way it always did in late September, slow and gray and reluctant, with a thin frost lying along the willows by the creek, and the breath of the horses rising in white plumes against the dawn. Rebecca Haywood woke before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. She lay still inside the canvas tent for a long moment, listening to her sister's breathing beside her, and the breathing was easy. It was easier than it had been in 2 months. The dry mountain air was already doing what Dr. Whitman had said it would do. She rose carefully so as not to wake Lily. She wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders and pushed open the tent flap. The fire had been kept burning all night. One of the brothers had tended it, she did not know which. Caleb sat on a log beside it now, with a tin cup in his hands and a coffee pot blackening on the coals. He looked up as she came out, and he stood the way her father had stood when her mother entered a room, the way men used to stand when she was a child, and the world had still made some kind of sense. Coffee, Miss Haywood. Please, and Mr. Walker. You may call me Rebecca if you would like to. He considered this. I would like to, if you would call me Caleb. I will. He poured the coffee. His hand was steady this morning. She noticed that. She had noticed the small tremor the night before when he reached across the fire to refill his own cup, and she had wondered about it, and now she did not see it, and she wondered about that too. The narrator wishes to draw your attention to a small thing, friend, because small things are how stories are won and lost. There was a quietness between these two people that morning that did not need to be filled with talk. Most strangers would have rushed to film it. Most strangers would have made small noises of weather and trail and how the coffee was. These two did not. They sat by the fire and drank in silence and listened to the creek run, and somewhere in that silence, without either of them quite noticing, a thing began that would not be undone. The wagon rolled out before the sun was fully up. Wyatt drove. Silas rode ahead on his bay, scouting the trail. Caleb rode alongside the wagon on the gray gelding, never more than 50 feet from where Rebecca sat with Lily wrapped in blankets beside her on the seat. The road climbed. It climbed all morning. The pines grew thicker and darker, and the air grew thinner and sweeter, and the cliffs on their right hand rose up sheer and pale gray against a sky that was the color of washed glass. At noon, they stopped at a wide place in the road and ate cold biscuits and dried beef. Lily, who had been quiet, touched Caleb's sleeve and asked in a small voice whether there were bears. Yes, Miss Lily, there are bears. Big ones. Big enough, but they are afraid of us mostly, and we have rifles. You do not need to be afraid of bears. Are you afraid of bears? He thought about it. The narrator wants you to mark that he thought about it, that he did not give the easy answer the way most grown men give the easy answer to children. He pulled back the collar of his shirt to show a long, pale scar that ran from the hollow of his throat down across his collarbone and disappeared beneath the cloth. I was once, 5 years ago. I am more careful now. Lily looked at the scar with grave attention. Did it hurt? Yes, ma'am, it hurt considerable. What happened to the bear? He went home. We let each other be. This seemed to satisfy her. She finished her biscuit and leaned against her sister's shoulder, and the wagon rolled on. It was late in the afternoon with the sun already low and the long shadows already pooling in the bottoms when the road bent through a final stand of aspen and the trees opened and the valley lay below them. Rebecca drew in a small breath. She had been preparing herself on the long ride up for the cabin she had imagined. A small structure of rough logs, a leaning shed, a garden gone to seed. She had been preparing herself to be glad of it, to make a home of it, to find joy in its smallness. She had not been preparing herself for what she saw. The valley was perhaps 2 miles wide and 4 miles long, cupped between high ridges of dark timber, watered by a clear river that wound silver down its center. There was a great deal of meadow still green in patches, even this close to winter, and good fence, and stone walls, and split rail corrals running clean lines along the river. There were barns. There were 3 of them, each large enough to hold 30 horses or more. There was a mill on the river, its wheel turning slow. There were 5 small cabins set in a row along the road that came down off the western slope, and smoke rose from each of them, and a woman was hanging wash on a line outside one, and children were running in the lane between 2 others. There was a small white schoolhouse with a bell. There was faintly in the cold air the sound of a smithy hammer ringing somewhere out of sight. And in the center of it all, set on a slight rise above the river, was a house. It was not a mansion. The narrator wants to be plain about this. It was not a lord's manor. It was not the grand home of an Eastern speculator. It was a working ranch house, 2 stories of squared white pine, with a deep porch wrapping 3 sides and a stone chimney rising at either end, and a roof of split shake that had weathered to silver. It was a house built by a man who knew how to build for a family meant to last. It was solid the way a good axe is solid. It was honest. But it was not the house of a poor mountain man. Rebecca turned slowly to look at Caleb, where he sat as gray on the road beside her. He was not looking at the valley. He was looking at her. His hazel eyes were watchful and a little tired and braced for something. "Caleb," she said quietly, "what have you not told me?" He swung down from the saddle without answering. He came to the side of the wagon and rested his hand on the wheel. He looked up at her, and he did not look away. "My father came up this valley in 1858. The valley was empty. He filed the first claim. He cut the first tree. He laid the first stone in that chimney with his own hands. He brought my mother out from Philadelphia in the spring of '59. They built it together. He named the place Walker Ridge. He raised his 3 sons here. He died on the road we just came up 6 years ago this October. My mother lived 3 days after him." He paused. He set his jaw. "He left this to me and my brothers. We have not been able to bring ourselves to call it anything but the home place. But what it is, Rebecca, is a working ranch and a timber operation and a community of 200 souls who depend on it for their living. I did not lie to you. We are not wealthy, but we are not poor. And I should have told you that in writing. I am telling you now." Rebecca looked down the road at the valley and the house and the smoke from the cabins. She did not speak for a long moment. The narrator will tell you that she was thinking many things at once. She was thinking of the $12 in her purse. She was thinking of the mended dresses in her satchel. She was thinking of the mud on her hem. She was thinking of Margaret Ellsworth's voice on the train saying, "Turn around, turn around." She was thinking of the laughter of 30 men in a dirt street the day before. And under all of that, she was thinking of a sentence from a letter she had carried in her bodice for 6 days, the words written by a man who had not yet known her. "A good man does not judge a tree by its bark. She turned back to Caleb. You should have told me, she said, but I understand why you did not, and I am not angry. Thank you. I am only one thing, Caleb. Yes, ma'am. I am tired. Will you take us home, please? Something moved across his face that she could not name. He nodded once and he got back on the gray, and the wagon rolled down the long, curving track to the house. There was a woman waiting on the porch. She was perhaps 55, broad and strong, with iron gray hair pinned tight and a long apron over a calico dress and the wind-reddened cheeks of a woman who had spent her life in this country. She came down the steps as the wagon pulled in, and she did not look at Caleb or at his brothers. She looked at Rebecca and then at Lily, and her face, which had begun as stern, softened in a way that Rebecca would later understand had been a long time coming. Lord have mercy, the woman said quietly. Lord, Lord, look at the size of you. Both of you. Caleb dismounted. Hannah Mae Holloway, this is Miss Rebecca Haywood, and Miss Lily. Mr. Walker, I do not need you to introduce me. I have a pair of eyes. Hannah Mae came around the wagon and lifted Lily down with the ease of a woman who had carried many children, and she set her on her feet on the porch step, and she did not let go of her hand. Come now, child. There is hot water on the stove. You have not had a proper bath in a week of Sundays, and I know it because I can see it. And you, Miss Haywood, you come right along behind. There is stew on the stove and bread in the oven, and the back bedroom has been aired. Come now. Rebecca was helped down by Caleb's hand at her elbow. She crossed the porch on legs that were trembling now, not from fear, but from the long letting down of fear, and she stepped through the door of the house she had married into. The narrator wants to take you inside, friend, because some rooms tell a story all their own. The front room was wee and warm and smelled of cedar and wood smoke and bread. There was a great stone fireplace at the far end with a good fire going. There were heavy beams overhead, dark with age. There were rag rugs on the wide plank floor. There was a long table of oak scarred with decades of use. There was a tall case clock against the wall ticking slow. There were no chandeliers. There were no painted portraits. There was above the fireplace a single carved wooden plaque, and the carving was of a single line of words, and the words were these: A good man does not judge a tree by its bark. Rebecca stopped in the middle of the room. She looked up at the plaque. Her hand went to her bodice where the letter still rested against her heart. Caleb came in behind her with the satchel. My father carved that, he said quietly, when I was about 9 years old. He said it more often than he said grace at table. My mother painted it after. She said a good saying deserved a good plaque. You wrote it to me in the letter. I did. You meant it? Yes, ma'am, I meant it. I have meant it my whole life. I have not always lived up to it, but I have meant it. Rebecca did not turn to look at him. If she had turned, she would not have been able to keep her face. She kept her face. She stood in the middle of the front room of the house her husband had grown up in, and she looked at the words his father had carved when he was 9 years old. And she understood finally in the slow, deep way that real understanding comes that she had not been brought here as a transaction. She had been brought here as a homecoming. The man who had written that letter had not been writing words. He had been writing a creed. She had answered the creed, and the creed had brought her home. Behind her, in a quieter voice, Caleb said, There is more I have to tell you, not tonight. Tonight you eat and you wash and you sleep. But before the week is out, I will tell you the rest, about my father's will, about my aunt in Denver, about why Bradley wants this valley, about what is coming. You have a right to know all of it, and I will not keep it from you any longer than your tiredness requires. Tomorrow night, she said. Ma'am, tomorrow night, not tonight. Tomorrow night I will be rested enough to listen properly. I do not want to hear it tired. Tomorrow night, then. She nodded once. She did not turn around. He set the satchel down softly and went out, and the door closed behind him with the small, careful click of a man who does not slam doors. Hannah Mae took her in hand then. There was a hot bath drawn in a copper tub before the kitchen stove, And there was lavender soap that had not been used since Martha Walker died 6 years before. And there was a clean night dress of soft cotton that was a little too big in the shoulders and a little too short at the wrist. And Rebecca did not care at all. Lily was bathed first and put to bed in the small room across the hall from the back bedroom with two thick wool blankets and a hot brick wrapped in flannel at her feet. The child was asleep before her sister had finished tucking her in. Rebecca stood in the doorway and watched her for a long minute, the small chest rising and falling, steady and easy, and she thought this much at least has been worth all of it. This much at least. She slept that night in a feather bed for the first time in her life. She slept 11 hours. The narrator wishes to skip lightly across the next several days, friend, because not every day in a story needs its full telling. There were quiet days. There were days of getting the lay of the place. Hannah Mae walked her through the kitchen, in the spring house, in the smokehouse, in the root cellar. Caleb walked her through the barns and the corrals and the mill and the schoolhouse. He introduced her to the families who lived in the cabins along the Western Road. There were the Bromleys with 3 children. There were the Petersons, lately arrived from Minnesota. There was a foreman named Tom Garrity and his wife Edith, who taught the school. There were single men in the bunkhouse near the mill, 12 of them, who tipped their hats and called her Mrs. Walker even before she was Mrs. Walker. The valley had been told somehow of her coming. The valley accepted her. The narrator does not know quite how this works in mountain places, but it works, and it had worked here. And she was inside the circle before she had quite realized there was a circle. On the second night, true to his word, Caleb took her into the study at the back of the house after Lily was abed, and he closed the door and his brothers were waiting. The study was small. It had a desk of black walnut that had belonged to Jonathan Walker. There were 2 leather chairs and a horsehair settee. There was a map of the valley on the wall, drawn by Wyatt's careful hand and pinned with brass tacks. There were ledgers. There was a single oil lamp burning low. The fire in the small grate had been laid but not lit. Caleb lit it now with a long match. The flames caught and rose, and the 4 of them sat down, and Caleb began to tell her the rest. He told her about his father's will. He told her there was a clause in it. The clause said that Walker Ridge, the timber operation, the cattle, all of it would pass to the eldest son, entire, but only if the eldest son was lawfully married before his 33rd birthday. If he was not, the property would pass instead in part to Jonathan Walker's surviving sister, Catherine Walker Ashford of Denver. Catherine had not spoken to her brother in 15 years before he died. She had not come to his funeral. She was, Caleb said, choosing his words with the slowness of a man laying flagstones. Not a person who loved the country. She was a person who loved the city and the things that money in the city could buy. And she had married a man in Denver who had taught her to think of land in a particular way, and that way was not a way Jonathan Walker had ever been able to abide. Caleb's 33rd birthday was the 2nd of February, 1886, just over 4 months from the day Rebecca was sitting in that study. He told her about the valley and what Catherine wanted to do with it. There was a man named Victor Harlan in Denver, the president of the Harlan & Sons Bank, who had been in correspondence with Catherine for 2 years. Harlan had connections with the Pacific Railroad. The railroad wanted the timber on the eastern slope of Walker Ridge, an area called Cottonwood Pines. They wanted it cleared every tree in 2 seasons. Wyatt had the surveys. Wyatt could explain it. Wyatt did. Wyatt rose from his chair and went to the map on the wall. He pointed to the eastern slope. Cottonwood Pines is the watershed for this valley, Rebecca. Every spring on the western slope, every well, in every cabin, every drop of water in the river that runs through the meadow comes down off that slope. If they cut it the way they intend to cut it, top to bottom in 2 seasons, this valley will flood the first heavy spring and silt the second and run dry by the third. 50 families live on those slopes. 200 souls work this land. None of them will be able to live here anymore. The valley will be ruined. That is what Catherine intends. That is what Harlan has paid for. That is what Bradley has been working toward in Pine Ridge for 5 years. Rebecca was silent. And the mayor, she said at last, Bradley, he is part of this. He is the local arm of it. Caleb's voice was quiet. We have suspected for some time. We have not been able to prove. Wyatt has friends from Yale who are in the federal courts now. He has been quietly looking. He has found things. Not enough yet, but things. Bradley took $15,000 from the Pacific Railroad in 1880. We have a copy of the bank draft. Wyatt's friend Harrison Crawford pulled it from the federal records last spring. Bradley has used the money to buy up debts in this valley, hoping to leverage families off their land. He has not yet succeeded. He has been waiting for the will to come due. Silas spoke for the first time that evening. He had been sitting in the corner with his rifle across his knees, the way some men sit with a cup of coffee. Last August, Rebecca, the mill burned. The mill. The old mill, down the river 1/2 mile from the new one. It was the original sawmill my father built. We had it running still, doing rough cuts for the cabins. It burned in the night. We thought lightning. There was a storm that night, but I rode the burn the next morning, and I have eyes for these things, and that fire was set. There was kerosene on the foundation stones. Sheriff Mercer would not investigate. Mercer is Bradley's man. We knew and we could not prove. Wyatt's friend in New York is working on thawing that too, Caleb said. He believes he will have proof inside the month. Receipts, witnesses, a trail. Rebecca looked from one brother to the other. And me, she said quietly. Where do I fit in this? Caleb looked at her across the lamp. The clause requires a marriage. Not a particular kind of marriage. Not an arranged marriage. A real one lawfully entered in good faith. I had decided last spring after the fever winter that I could not face another year alone and that I would not marry one of the women that Catherine and her circle in Denver were forever pushing on me. They do not love this place. They love what this place would buy them. I wanted a wife who could love this place. I placed an advertisement. I received 47 replies. I read them all. 46 of them I set aside. The 47th was yours. Why mine? Because you wrote about your sister. You did not write about yourself. You wrote about a child you were trying to save. A woman who writes about her sister before she writes about herself is a woman who knows how to put a place above herself. I needed such a woman. I hoped you would come. I did not dare to hope hard. He paused. He looked down at his hands. I will tell you the last thing now, Rebecca, because it should be said plain. I did not bring you here to be a piece in a fight with my aunt. If you wish to leave in the morning, I will pay your way back to Boston with money enough to set you and your sister up in a small house and to keep her in good doctors for as long as her lungs require. I will sign whatever papers are needed. The will pass to my aunt. The valley will be lost. That will be on me, not on you, and I will bear it. I want you to know that you may go. You are not trapped here. The fire in the grate cracked. A coal fell. Rebecca was quiet for a long time. The narrator wants to take a breath here, friend, because what she said next is one of the things this whole long story turns on, and a thing said too quickly does not land. Caleb. Yes, ma'am. In Boston, I have $12 and a sister who would not have lived through October. Here I have a feather bed and a child who slept 11 hours her first night. Here I have men who ride 60 miles in an afternoon to pick a stranger's bag out of the mud. Here I have a kitchen with a plaque above the fireplace that says the same thing the letter said that brought me out, and the man who wrote both of them is sitting across this fire from me. I am not going back to Boston, Caleb. You understand what you are walking into. I understand. It will be a hard 4 months. I have had hard months, Caleb. I expect I have a few left in me. Silas in the corner drew a slow breath. The narrator does not know if Rebecca heard it. He had not made many such sounds in the last 6 years. Wyatt looked up at the ceiling and blinked at nothing in particular. Then I will ask you a question, Caleb said. His voice had gone very quiet. Will you marry me? In the chapel by the river. Reverend Crawford on Sunday next. Lily will stand for you. My brothers will stand for me, not for the will, because of the letter and what was written in it. Yes, 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 Caleb, I will. The wedding was on the first Sunday of October in the small white chapel at the bend of the river. Reverend Eli Crawford was 75 years old that autumn. He had buried Caleb's father and mother both, and he had baptized all three Walker boys, and his hands shook a little now when he held the prayer book, but his voice was steady. The chapel held perhaps 30 people. The Bromley family came. The Petersons came. Tom and Edith Garrity came. The men from the bunkhouse came in their cleanest shirts. Hannah Mae Holloway sat in the front pew on the bride's side and wept quietly into a pressed handkerchief and did not seem to know she was weeping. Lily Haywood, scrubbed and braided and wearing a small dress that Edith Garrity had stayed up 2 nights to alter from one of Martha Walker's old gowns, stood beside her sister with her thin shoulders pulled back like a soldier's. Rebecca wore a cream-colored dress that Hannah Mae had brought down from the cedar chest in the attic that morning. It had been Martha Walker's wedding dress. It fit with small alterations, almost as though it had been waiting 26 years to fit again. Caleb wore a clean white shirt and a black coat and his father's gold ring. He had shaved himself unsteadily at 4 o'clock that morning in the kitchen with a straight razor that he had not used in a year. He had nicked his jaw twice. When Reverend Crawford asked him whether he took this woman, Caleb Walker was silent for a long beat. The chapel held its breath. Then he turned and he looked at Rebecca, and his hazel eyes were the color of whiskey held up to a low fire, and they were not tired anymore. I do, he said. Forever and a day, sir, I do. He did not kiss her on the mouth. He bent and pressed his lips against her forehead, very softly, the way a man kisses a thing he has waited a long time to find. Lily, beside her sister, gave a small sound that was half laugh and half sob. Outside the chapel, the bell rang. The men in the bunkhouse had taken up a collection and bought by mail order from Denver a length of white silk ribbon, and they tied it now to the bell rope and rang it for 1 full minute. The sound carried up the valley to the high ridges. The narrator is told that elk in the upper meadow lifted their heads to listen. The narrator does not know if this is true. The narrator chooses to believe it. The narrator wishes to take a small detour here, friend, because there is a sermon Reverend Eli Crawford preached at that wedding that bears repeating. He stood in the pulpit, and he was old, and his hands shook on the prayer book, and he said this. He said, I have lived 75 years in this country. I have seen empires rise and fall in a single lifetime. I have seen the railroad come, and I have seen the buffalo go, and I have seen towns built and towns abandoned. And I have learned that there are only 2 kinds of people in this world. There are people who look at a stranger and ask, what can this person do for me? And there are people who look at a stranger and ask, what does this person need? The first kind builds nothing that lasts. The second kind builds everything that does. Today we are watching the second kind build something. May the Lord bless this work and keep it. Amen. The narrator thinks of that sermon often. The narrator thinks of it when the news is bum and when the times are hard and when it seems that the first kind of person is everywhere and the second kind has been driven out. The narrator says to himself, no, they are still here. They are quiet. They do not announce themselves, but they are still here and they are still building. Reverend Crawford was right. That night, after the supper and the dancing in the front room and the fiddle music and the carrying of small Lily to bed, already half asleep on Caleb's shoulder, Hannah Mae Holloway found Rebecca in the kitchen alone, washing the last of the cups. Mrs. Walker, she said, and it was the first time anyone had said the name aloud to Rebecca, and Rebecca felt the change of it in her bones. Hannah Mae, I have something I must tell you. Not tonight. Tonight is for joy, but soon, within the week. There is something I have done, something I have been doing for 5 years, something that will cause your husband great pain when he hears of it. I would tell him myself, but he is so happy tonight. And I cannot. I will tell him within the week. I tell you now only because you should know that it is coming, and you should know that I am sorry, and you should know that when the time comes, I will not lie. Not anymore. I cannot anymore. Rebecca set down the cup she was washing. She looked at the older woman in the lamplight. Hannah Mae Holloway's face was the face of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and the carrying had finally broken her, and she was setting it down because she could not lift it one more step. Hannah Mae, whatever it is, tell me now. Not tonight, Mrs. Walker, please. Tonight is for Joy. Hannah Mae, please, please. Rebecca took the older woman's hands in hers. The hands were rough and red from years of work, and they trembled now in Rebecca's small fingers. Within the week, Rebecca said, you will tell my husband within the week, and I will be in the room, and we will hear it together. Whatever it is, we will hear it together. Yes, ma'am. And Hannah Mae, yes, ma'am. Whatever you have done, I do not believe you did it freely. I have watched you with Lily for 10 days. A woman who is wicked through and through cannot fool a sick child for 10 days. Lily knows you, so do I. We will hear it together and we will deal with it together, and you will not be alone in it. The older woman put both her hands over her face and wept. She wept for nearly a full minute. Rebecca stood beside her in the kitchen, holding her by the shoulders, and did not let her go, and did not speak, and did not press, and let the long weeping have its hour. Outside, somewhere down the valley, a coyote called. 3 nights after the wedding, the trouble began to walk. It walked, the narrator will tell you, on the soft soles of a housekeeper's shoes across a wood plank floor at 11:30 at night, and the lamp she carried was turned low, and her hands trembled around the brass base of it, and the small papers she had hidden in the lining of her sewing basket for 5 years were tucked now against her chest beneath her shawl. Hannah Mae Holloway crossed the front room of the White Pine House and stopped at the door of the study and stood there for a long moment with her forehead pressed against the wood, gathering what she had left, and then she knocked. Caleb Walker was awake. He had been awake for an hour. There was a thing in him Rebecca had begun to notice in their first 3 days as man and wife that did not let him sleep before midnight. He sat in the leather chair by the small grate with a ledger open on his knee and an unlit pipe in his hand. He looked up when the knock came, and Rebecca, who was sitting across from him with a basket of mending in her lap, set the basket aside without being asked. Come in, Hannah Mae. The door opened. The older woman stood in the doorway with the lamp. Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker, may I have a word with the both of you, privately, now? At this hour, it will not keep until morning, sir. I have already kept it 5 years too long. Caleb closed the ledger. He set it on the desk. He nodded at the settee. Hannah Mae came in and closed the door behind her and did not sit. She set the lamp on the desk. She drew the small bundle of papers out from under her shawl and set them down beside the lamp, and she stood there with her old red hands clasped in front of her apron and looked at the floor. Mr. Walker, I have been a thief in your house for 5 years. The fire ticked. Hannah Mae. No, sir. Let me say it through. If you stop me, I will not get to the end. 5 years ago, this past August, my son Edward, my only child, was arrested in Denver for the theft of a loaf of bread. He was 18 years old. He had come down off the mountain to look for winter work because we had been short the year before, and he had run out of money before he found a place, and he was hungry, and he took the loaf from a baker's window. The baker came out and set the law on him. He was tried in 3 days, sir. 3 days. The judge gave him 15 years in the territorial prison. Caleb's jaw moved once and was still. Mayor Bradley came to see me a week after the sentencing. He had ridden up from Pine Ridge in the snow on purpose. He sat in this very kitchen, sir. He drank my coffee. He told me that Edward would not survive 15 years. He told me that boys Edward's age died inside that prison every winter. He told me he had a friend, an associate, a person of influence in Denver who could see Edward's sentence reduced, who could have him moved to a softer placement, who could keep him alive. And in return, Mr. Walker, all I had to do was answer certain questions about the household when the mayor came to call, or to write certain things down, or to copy certain pages from certain ledgers when no one was at home. She stopped. She put one hand over her eyes. I told myself it was small things. The first year it was small things. What men were on the Eastern crew, how much timber went to which buyer, whose contract was up for renewal. I told myself it could not hurt anyone and Edward was alive because of it. And then it became larger things. The contents of letters, the drafts of contracts, the names of the men your brother visited at Yale when he went east 2 summers ago. Last spring it became the survey maps of Cottonwood Pines. I copied them by lamplight in this house, sir, and I sent them down to Pine Ridge by the freight man. And in August, when the old mill burned, I had told them 3 weeks before that the watchman had taken sick and would not be on the river that night. Rebecca had risen halfway from her chair without realizing it. She sat back down slowly. Hannah Mae took her hand from her eyes. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at the bundle of papers on the desk. Those are the letters Catherine has sent to me over the years. I kept every one. I do not know why I kept them. Perhaps a part of me knew this day would come and wanted there to be a record. Perhaps a part of me wanted to be caught. I do not know my own heart anymore, Mr. Walker. I have not known it in 5 years, but there they are. Every name, every date, every instruction, every sum she sent to my sister in Wyoming for Edward's care. It is all there. She stopped speaking. The fire ticked. He sat very still in the leather chair for a long count of breaths. He did not touch the papers. He did not look at the lamp. He looked at Hannah Mae Holloway, who would not raise her eyes from the floor, and his own eyes filled very slowly the way a still well fills with rain. He did not let the tears go. They sat there in his hazel eyes and did not fall. Hannah Mae. Yes, sir. How old is Edward now? 23, sir. He turned 23 in May. Have you seen him? Once, sir, 3 years ago. Catherine arranged a visit through her friend, the warden. He was thin. He had lost a tooth. He did not blame me. I think that was the worst of it. He did not blame me. You have been raising my mother's biscuit recipe for 25 years, Hannah Mae. Yes, sir. You held my mother's hand when she died. Yes, sir. You held mine last winter when the fever broke. The older woman made a small sound. She did not answer. I am not going to dismiss you, Hannah Mae. She lifted her head then. Her face was wet. The narrator does not know if she had realized she was crying. Sir, you are going to sit down there on the settee. Mrs. Walker is going to fetch the coffee pot from the kitchen. We are going to read these letters together, the three of us, very carefully, and we are going to make a list of every name in them, and we are going to make a second list of every date, and we are going to send a rider down to Pine Ridge in the morning to fetch the freight man before he leaves on his Tuesday run. We are going to write to Wyatt's friend in New York. And then, Hannah Mae, we are going to bring your boy home. Sir, he has served 5 years for a loaf of bread. He will not serve another night. Do you understand me? Sir, the law. The law, Hannah Mae was bought by the same man who bought you. The law is what we are about to fix. Sit down. Mrs. Walker, the coffee pot, please. Rebecca rose. She crossed the study. She paused at the door. She turned back. She crossed to where Hannah Mae stood trembling, and she put her arms around the older woman, and she held her, and she did not let go for a count of 15. Then she went for the coffee pot. They worked until 3 in the morning. By the time Wyatt was woken and brought down from his room above the kitchen, by the time Silas came in from the bunkhouse, where he had been playing cards with the nightmen, by the time the four of them and Hannah Mae had spread the letters across the long oak table in the front room and begun the slow, careful work of indexing. What was there, the small grate fire in the study had gone out, and a different fire had been built in the great stone fireplace under the carved plaque, and that fire was tall. What was in those letters, friend, would have been enough to convict Mayor Horace Bradley of conspiracy in any honest court in the territory. There were instructions written in Catherine Walker Ashford's elegant, slanted hand. There were sums of money. There were the names of the men Bradley had hired to start the August fire. There was in a letter dated April of that year an explicit reference to a payment Catherine had received from Victor Harlan of the Harlan and Sons Bank, drawn on an account that Wyatt's friend Harrison Crawford had already the previous spring traced to Pacific Railroad funds. It was Wyatt who saw it first. He had been reading slowly, his thumb moving down a page, and he stopped and he read it again, and he said very quietly, "Caleb." Yes, they are not going to wait for the 2nd of February. Listen to this. April letter. Catherine writes, "Do not allow our project to depend upon the boy missing his birthday. He has surprised us before. We must move within the calendar year. The judge is prepared. The petition is drafted. Bring the matter before the territorial council before the snow flies, and let the mountain do the rest." Silas raised his head from the page he was reading. The scar on his left cheek caught the lamplight. What does that mean? Let the mountain do the rest. It means, Wyatt said, that they intended to bring the case in the autumn, win the property by judicial decree, and then count on a hard winter to do the rest of the work. If we are dispossessed in October and the snow comes early, we will not be able to defend the eastern slope. By spring, the work will be half done. Caleb set down the letter he had been holding. When is the Territorial Council in session next? December 15th, Pine Ridge Town Hall. It rotates this year. 8 weeks from tonight. 8 weeks. The narrator wants to mark this moment, friend. There were 4 people sitting around an oak table in the front room of a white pine house at 3 in the morning. There were 8 weeks between them and the reckoning. There was a fire under a carved plaque, and the plaque said what it had always said. There was a woman across the table with red eyes who had just laid down a knife she had been carrying for 5 years. There was a silence that lasted perhaps a minute, and in that silence, each of those 4 people in their separate ways made a decision. Rebecca made hers first. Hannah May. Yes, ma'am. On the 2nd of February, my husband will turn 33. The provision in his father's will requires only that he be married before that date. He is married. The provision is satisfied. They cannot simply take the property because they have decided to. They have to bring a case. They have to argue that the marriage is not lawful, that it is fraudulent, that it was made for the wrong reasons. Yes, ma'am. They will argue that I married him for money, or that he married me to defeat the will. They will bring witnesses. They will pay them. They will produce documents. They will have this judge of theirs ready to rule against us. Yes, ma'am. Then we are going to bring a better argument and better witnesses and better documents, and we are going to bring them in front of the whole territorial council, and we are going to end this in one afternoon. Caleb looked at her across the table. Rebecca, Caleb, you have been my wife for 3 days. Yes. You should not have to fight this. Caleb Walker. Listen to me carefully. I came here on a train. I came here with a sister who was dying. I came here because a man I had never met wrote me a letter that said, "A good man does not judge a tree by its bark." I came here, Caleb. I am here. This is my house. Lily is my sister, and she is sleeping right now in a feather bed in a room down the hall, and her lungs are clear for the first time in 2 years. And that is because of this valley, and because of you, and because of your brothers, and because of Hannah May, and because of every soul in those cabins down the road. I am not going to stand by while a man in a brown wool suit takes any of it. Do you understand me? The fire in the great stone fireplace popped. A coal fell. The carved plaque above caught the light. I understand, Caleb said. I understand you, Rebecca. Good. The next 2 weeks moved fast. A rider went down to Pine Ridge before sunrise and brought back the freight man, a quiet German named Otto Reiner, who confessed inside 10 minutes that he had been running letters between Hannah May and the mayor's office for the full 5 years, and was glad to be done with it. He gave a sworn statement to Wyatt and signed it and asked in his thick accent whether he might keep his job hauling freight to the valley because he had not minded the work, only the carrying of the letters. Caleb told him gravely that he might keep the bum and that he would never carry another letter for anyone in Pine Ridge again. And Otto Reiner said, yes, this is good, this is much better, and went back to his wagon. A telegram went east to Harrison Crawford in New York in code that he and Wyatt had agreed upon at Yale and had not used in 7 years. The reply came back within 2 days. Crawford was already on a train. He would be in Denver by the following Wednesday with the federal documentation with witnesses with a case file 3 inches thick. A letter went down to Dr. Whitman in Boston asking after Edward Holloway and the legal status of his case, requesting any papers he could send and the name of the best frontier criminal lawyer he knew of. The doctor wrote back by return post that he knew exactly the man was already on retainer to the Walker household, if Caleb wished, and that he had taken the liberty of making preliminary inquiries because he had suspected from the moment Hannah Mae's name had appeared in Rebecca's first letter home that there might be something to look into. Dr. Whitman was, the narrator will tell you, a man who saw further than most. Silas began riding the eastern ridge at dusk and at dawn with a Sharps rifle and a telescope. He did not say what he was watching for. Caleb did not ask. The narrator will tell you that on the third evening, just before full dark, Silas sat his horse on a high spur of the ridge and watched a single rider on a black gelding Hawes at the southern entrance to the valley look up the road for perhaps a full minute through a glass of his own and then turn and ride back the way he had come. Silas marked the man. Silas marked the horse. Silas marked the time. He came home and said only, "They are scouting us. They will come by the south road. We have 10 days, maybe 12. Wyatt began drafting the answer to the petition that they all knew was coming. He worked at the small desk in his upstairs room with the door open and the lamp burning until 2 and 3 in the morning. The narrator does not know if you have ever seen a man write a legal answer in defense of his family's home. It is a particular thing. It is not done with anger. It is done with the slow, patient assembly of fact upon fact upon fact, the way a stone wall is laid. And when it is done well, the wall stands, and when it is done poorly, it does not. Wyatt Walker laid stone for 14 days. Rebecca did 3 things in those 2 weeks that the narrator wants you to know about. She walked the valley. She walked it on a small bay mare that Caleb gave her on the 6th morning, a horse that did not mind a rider, whose right knee did not bend the way the left one did. She rode out alone after breakfast, and she came back at dusk, and she went into every cabin along the western road, and she sat at every kitchen table, and she drank coffee with every wife and listened to every story. She learned the names of 47 children. She learned that Edith Garrity's mother had taught school in a town called Acton in Massachusetts, 3 miles from where Rebecca's own mother had grown up. She learned that Tom Garrity had a brother working on the railroad survey out of Cheyenne. She learned that the Petersons' youngest was running a fever that needed watching. She came home each evening with her notebook full and her cheeks red from the cold, and she sat at the long oak table after supper, and she copied her notes into a longer ledger, and she planned. She wrote letters. She wrote them at the desk in the study while Caleb worked on the books beside her, and she wrote 41 of them in 14 days. She wrote to every woman of standing she had ever served as governess to in Boston. She wrote to the headmistress of the school at which she had been a pupil, who was now retired, but had married into a family with railroad interests of its own. She wrote to her late mother's cousin in Philadelphia, a Quaker woman who had been a friend of Caleb's mother, Martha Holcomb, in their girlhood, and who had not been heard from in 20 years, but who Rebecca suspected would remember Martha. She wrote on the 11th evening to Margaret Ellsworth in Denver at the address Hannah Mae had given her from the bundle of letters, and what she wrote the narrator will not yet tell you. That letter friend will keep until the council. And she sat with Hannah Mae Holloway every evening in the kitchen after Lily was abed. They sat by the stove. They drank chamomile tea. They did not always speak. Some evenings, Hannah Mae wept quietly and Rebecca held her hand. Some evenings, Rebecca asked careful questions about Edward, about the prison, about what conditions he was living under. And Hannah Mae answered, and slowly in those small evening conversations, a portrait of a young man emerged. Edward Holloway, the narrator, will tell you, was not a hardened criminal. He had been a sweet boy, his mother said. He had carved small wooden animals for the Bromley children every Christmas. He had loved the river. He had wanted before the trouble to apprentice with the carpenter in Pine Ridge. He had stolen a loaf of bread at 18 because he was hungry. The territorial prison he had written his mother in his last letter that summer had taught him several things he had not wished to learn. But he was alive. He was, his mother said, alive. It was the 15th day after the wedding when the rider on the black horse came back. Lily Haywood, who had been growing stronger with every passing morning, had spent the day with Edith Garrity at the schoolhouse. She had read aloud from a primer for the smaller children. She had eaten her noon meal with the Bromley girls. She had ridden home on the wagon with Tom Garrity at 4 in the afternoon, laughing in a way that her sister had not heard her laugh in fully 2 years. She came in the kitchen door with her cheeks red and her hair loose and a small wooden carving in her hand that one of the Bromley children had given her, a horse with a blanket no larger than her thumb. She set the carving on the windowsill above the dry sink. She turned to her sister, who was peeling apples at the table, and she said in a voice that was not quite the same voice she had used that morning, "Becca, there is a man on the South Road." Rebecca set down her knife. "What man?" "On a black horse. He is sitting at the fork. He has been sitting there for an hour. Mr. Garrity saw him on the way back. Mr. Garrity says he has not moved." Caleb came through the kitchen door from the porch a half-second later. He had heard. Silas was already going for the rifle on the rack above the back door. Wyatt was already crossing the front room toward the study where the maps were. The rider was waiting because he had been told to wait. He had been told by a man named Sheriff Gideon Mercer, on instruction from Mayor Horace Bradley, that he was to ride to the entrance of the Walker Valley at 4 in the afternoon on the 15th of October and remain there visibly until full dark and then ride away. The purpose of the wait was to be seen. The purpose was to make the Walker brothers know they were watched. The purpose was to fray nerves in advance of what was coming. Silas Walker was not a man whose nerves frayed. He went out the back door with his sharps over his shoulder and a coil of rope on his belt. He did not ride. He walked. He moved through the cottonwoods along the river the way he had moved through Sioux country in '76, which was the way a wolf moves, and he came up behind the rider on the black horse from the south after a long half hour of careful approach, and the rider, a thin young man with a Texas accent and a Colt revolver on his hip, did not hear him at all until Silas spoke from 6 feet behind him in a conversational voice. "Friend," the rider went stiff in the saddle. "Do not turn your horse. Do not reach for that pistol. Just listen. You have been sitting at our fork for an hour and a half. We notice such things. We are now going to have a conversation. You and I, and the conversation is going to be polite, and at the end of it, you are going to ride back down to Pine Ridge, and you are going to tell Sheriff Mercer that the next man who scouts our valley after sunset will not be sent home with his horse. Do you understand the conversation we are about to have?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Step down." The rider stepped down. Silas walked around to where he could see the man's face. The Texan was perhaps 22 years old. He had been hired 3 weeks ago in Denver for a job he had been told was simple. He was discovering in that moment that it was not simple. "Your name?" "Tully, sir. Joseph Tully." "Mr. Tully, do you know what is at stake in this country?" "They told me a land dispute." "They told you a polite version. 200 souls live in this valley, 50 families on the Eastern Ridge alone. Children in that schoolhouse you can see from here. A schoolmistress who teaches them for free. A doctor we are bringing up next spring. The men who hired you mean to put all of those souls off this land before Easter. They mean to do it through a corrupt judge and a forged petition and a hard winter. Do you have any objection to working for such men?" Joseph Tully was silent for a long time. Sir, if you put it like that, yes, I do. What did they pay you? $40. Silas took out his wallet and counted out $40 in greenbacks and held the money out. This is mine. It is not a bribe. I do not need to bribe you. This is your affair back to Texas. There is a stage out of Pine Ridge on Tuesday. I will give you one piece of advice free before you go. Do not work for men in brown wool suits with gold watch chains. They sell the men they hire faster than they sell the men they steal from. Are we understood? Yes, sir, we are understood. Mount up. Ride south at a walk. Don't look back at this fork. Do not stop in Pine Ridge for any reason except to get on the stage. The stage leaves at 6 in the morning. You will be on it. Yes, sir. Joseph Tully got on his black horse. He rode south at a walk. He did not look back. He was on the 6 o'clock stage out of Pine Ridge the next morning, and he was in El Paso 4 days after that, and the narrator is told that he never came north of the Red River again as long as he lived. Silas Walker walked back to the home place through the cottonwoods. He did not run. He came in through the kitchen door at supper time with his rifle over his shoulder and dust on his boots, and he set the rifle on the rack above the door, and he sat down at the long oak table, and he said to no one in particular, "He has gone home. Pass the bread." Lily Haywood, who had been watching the door with wide eyes for 2 hours, gave a small, choke sound and got up from her chair and went around the table and put her arms around Silas Walker's neck and pressed her face into his shoulder. Silas, who had not been hugged by a child in fully 20 years, sat very still for a moment, and then he raised one large, weathered hand and patted her back very gently 3 times. He did not speak. The narrator does not know if he could have. Rebecca, watching from across the table, did not say anything either. She only got up and refilled his coffee. The next morning, Caleb rode down to Pine Ridge alone. He went, he said, to take the temperature of the town. He went to be seen. He went to remind Mayor Bradley and Sheriff Mercer that the master of Walker Ridge was still master of Walker Ridge and was not yet hiding behind locked doors. Wyatt and Silas argued against it. Rebecca did not argue. Rebecca walked out onto the porch with him in the gray light before dawn and watched him saddle the gray gelding and tighten the cinch and check the rifle in the scabbard, and she said only one thing. "Caleb, yes, come back tonight." "I will." He rode south down the valley road into the pale light. Rebecca watched him until he was out of sight. Then she went inside and she made breakfast for Lily, and after breakfast, she sat down at the desk in the study and she wrote a long letter to Margaret Ellsworth in Denver, and the letter said many things, and the most important thing it said was this. She said, "Miss Ellsworth, you tried to warn me on the train. I did not know then what you meant. I know now. There is a thing happening in this country that you have stayed clear of for good reasons. I am writing to ask you to step into it. Not for me, for yourself. There is a council meeting in Pine Ridge on the 15th of December. I believe your aunt will be there. I believe she will lie on a witness stand under oath to take a valley from 200 people who have done her no harm. I believe you know things that would weigh against her lies. I am not asking you to ruin your aunt. I am asking you to let the truth speak for itself in a public room and to be there when it does. I will understand if you do not come. I will not write again. I send this letter with the freight wagon on Friday. Yours, Rebecca Haywood Walker." She sealed the letter. She set it in the basket by the door for the freight man. Caleb came home at dusk that night just as he had said he would. He had spent 4 hours in Pine Ridge. He had taken his coffee at the saloon. He had paid a long visit to the assayer, who was an honest man and a friend of his father's. He had stopped at the bank briefly and made a small deposit in a way calculated to remind the manager who held the largest account in the bank. He had at no point spoken to Mayor Bradley or Sheriff Mercer. He had not needed to. The whole town had watched him come in and watched him go out, and the message that needed to be sent had been sent without a word. He had been seen. He was not afraid. The Walker brothers were not in hiding. The fight, when it came, would come in the open. He rode in at full arc. Rebecca was on the porch. She had been on the porch for 2 hours. You said tonight. I said tonight, Rebecca. She did not embrace him in front of the brothers who were down at the bunkhouse playing cards. She walked up to him while he was still in the saddle, and she put her hand on his thigh very briefly and looked up at his hazel eyes, and she said, "Get down. Supper has been waiting." He got down. He took her hand. They went inside. The first 3 weeks of November passed in the slow, careful gathering that is the prelude to every battle. Harrison Crawford arrived in Denver on a Wednesday afternoon as promised, carrying a leather valise and a federal warrant and 4 affidavits sworn in front of a federal magistrate in New York. He did not come up to Walker Ridge. He took rooms in the Brown Palace Hotel under a different name and waited. Wyatt rode down to meet him twice, riding overnight each way, and came back the second time with a thin smile that Rebecca had not seen him wear in the time she had known him. "They have done it, Caleb." "Done what?" "They have made a mistake. Catherine wrote to Harlan 3 weeks ago, and the letter went through a federal post, and Harrison's man inside the Postal Service saw it and copied it. She names the judge. She names the sum to be paid. She names the date of the council. We have her. She has put it on paper, Caleb. She has put it on paper." Caleb closed his eyes for a beat. "Edward." "On a separate matter, yes. Harrison has filed for review of the conviction. He has the original docket. 3 days from arrest to sentence is illegal under territorial procedure, and he can prove it. The judge who heard the case was the same judge they have lined up for the council. We are going to use that. We are going to ask the council to remove him on the basis of the prior conviction in the same hearing. It will be elegant, Caleb. It will be very elegant." And the freight man's testimony. Sworn, filed, sealed. And the letters. Indexed, cross-referenced. 3 separate sets of copies in 3 separate safes. Hannah Mae has been writing out clean copies in her own hand for 2 weeks. She is, as it turns out, very thorough. Hannah Mae, when this was reported to her, set down her dough on the kitchen counter and put her flour-dusted hands on her hips and said quite simply, "I have been very thorough about this household for 25 years, Mr. Wyatt. I do not stop being thorough because the work changes. Now go away and let me bake bread." Wyatt went away. Hannah Mae baked bread. The narrator wishes to note, friend, that the bread that came out of that oven that afternoon was the best bread Rebecca had ever eaten in her life. There is a thing that happens to a person who has set down a heavy weight. The weight does not just leave them. It transfers. It goes into whatever they touch next. Hannah Mae Holloway, having set down the knife she had carried for 5 years, had picked up flour and yeast and salt and water, and what came out of that kitchen for the rest of November was something worth driving 40 miles to taste. It was on the 1st of December, a clear, cold morning with the smell of real winter on the wind, that the second telegram came. Otto Reiner brought it up himself. He drove the freight wagon into the yard at noon and climbed down stiffly with a yellow envelope in his hand and walked up the porch steps and handed it to Caleb without a word. Caleb opened it. He read it twice. He did not change expression. Then he passed it to Rebecca. The telegram was from Margaret Ellsworth in Denver. It said, "Mrs. Walker, when I have read your letter, I will be in Pine Ridge on the 14th of December. I am bringing 2 boxes. One contains my aunt's correspondence with my late mother, who kept everything until her death 2 years ago. The second contains a letter my late Uncle Edmund Ashford wrote to my mother 3 weeks before he died, in which he describes certain transactions involving Pacific Railroad funds and certain payments made to Mr. Bradley. I am told by a federal lawyer in Denver that I am not breaking any law by bringing these things to a public council meeting. I am also told that I am ending a number of family relationships I have endured for too long. I find I do not mind. I will see you at the town hall. Yours, Margaret Ellsworth." Caleb read it once more over Rebecca's shoulder. He did not smile. He was not as a rule a man who smiled at moments of impending battle, but he looked down at his wife with a kind of slow, steady warmth, and he said very quietly, "You wrote her." "I wrote her." "What did you say?" "I said the truth. I said she had warned me on the train. I said I knew what she meant now. I said she had a chance to be on the right side of a thing that mattered. I did not press her. I asked her to consider it. And she came. She came." The narrator wishes to note, friend, that there are battles which are won not by armies, but by the slow, steady writing of letters in good faith. The Walker Valley in the end was held by such letters. The men in the bunkhouse held it with rifles too, and Silas held it from the eastern ridge with his sharps and his telescope, and Wyatt held it with affidavits sworn in front of federal magistrates, and Caleb held it with the simple, unbending fact of his presence on the porch of his own house. But the letter that carried it was Rebecca's. The letter that turned the tide was the one she wrote in November to a woman she had met for 10 minutes on a train. The 14th of December came in cold and bright, with 2 feet of fresh snow on the high meadow and a hard blue sky and the smell of wood smoke from the cabins drifting across the river. The Walkers and their party left the home place at dawn in 3 sleighs and 2 wagons. Caleb drove the lead sleigh. Rebecca sat beside him under a thick buffalo robe. Lily, scrubbed and braided and bundled in a coat of red wool that Edith Garrity had finished stitching only the night before, sat between them. Silas rode his bay alongside his sharps in the scabbard. Wyatt drove the second sleigh with Harrison Crawford beside him, the leather valise across his knees. Hannah Mae Holloway rode in the third sleigh with 2 of the bunkhouse men and 4 sealed boxes of indexed correspondence. Tom Garrity drove the first wagon with 8 more men. The second wagon carried Reverend Eli Crawford and his daughter Clara, and 12 of the workers' wives and Edith Garrity, and 3 of the older children who had asked to come and been told yes. They came down the mountain road in a long line. Pine Ridge, when they reached it, was not the Pine Ridge of late September. The town was full. The territorial council was in session. Word had spread. There were reporters from the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News on the boardwalk in front of the town hall. There were federal marshals at the hall doors, 2 of them in their long dark coats. There were Walker Ridge men already in town who had come down the day before with the supply wagons and had been quietly drinking coffee in the saloon since dawn, watching everyone who came and went. The valley had brought itself to the meeting. 200 souls, the narrator will tell you, do not move quietly when they move. Mayor Horace Bradley was on the boardwalk in front of his office at 10 in the morning, in his brown wool suit with the gold watch chain, watching the sleighs roll in. His face was a color the narrator can only describe as the color of a man who has not slept well for 3 weeks. Sheriff Gideon Mercer stood beside him, a thin, sour man of 42, with a tin star pinned crookedly on his vest. Catherine Walker Ashford had arrived the night before from Denver, with Victor Harlan and the bought judge, a man named Colbert Wheeler, who was 60 years old and carried himself like a man of importance. They were inside the hotel finishing breakfast. The council session was called for 1 o'clock that afternoon. The territorial council itself consisted of 7 men presided over by Governor James Adams of the Colorado Territory, who had ridden up from Denver on the same train as Catherine Walker Ashford and had spent the journey in a different car reading documents that had been delivered to him discreetly by Harrison Crawford the previous evening. Governor Adams was 60 years old, a Vermonter by birth, a man who had come west in '59 and had held public office in this country for 24 years. He did not take well to being lied to. He was, the narrator will tell you, not a man Catherine Walker Ashford should have underestimated. The town hall filled by 12:30. There were not enough seats. Men stood along the walls and at the back. Children were lifted onto laps. The freight man Otto Reiner stood near the door in a clean shirt. Margaret Ellsworth came in at 10 minutes to 1 alone in a deep gray traveling dress, carrying 2 flat wooden boxes. She did not look at Catherine. She walked to the bench reserved for witnesses and sat down beside Hannah Mae Holloway and set the boxes on her lap and waited. Catherine Walker Ashford came in at 1 minute to 1 on Victor Harlan's arm. She wore deep red velvet, the wrong color for the occasion, the narrator will note, and her gray hair was pinned with combs that flashed in the lamplight. She did not see her niece Margaret on the witness bench. She saw Caleb and Rebecca seated in the front row of the audience, and her smile thinned very slightly, and she sat down in the chair the petitioners had set out for her, and she folded her gloved hands in her lap. Judge Colbert Wheeler took a seat next to her. He was paid. He was prepared. He did not yet know that he was finished. Governor Adams gavelled the session to order at 1 o'clock. The narrator is not going to walk you, friend, through the 4 hours that followed in legal detail. There are men who can recite legal proceedings the way other men recite ballads, but the narrator is not such a man. The narrator is going to tell you the shape of what happened. The shape is what matters. The petitioners went first. Judge Wheeler spoke for an hour. He laid out the case. He argued that the marriage of Caleb Walker to Rebecca Haywood was a sham entered into for the purpose of defeating the lawful provisions of Jonathan Walker's will. He produced a sworn statement supposedly from a Boston physician alleging that Rebecca had stated her intent to marry for money. He produced a second statement supposedly from a Pine Ridge witness alleging that the wedding ceremony itself had been irregular. He produced a third statement from Mayor Bradley alleging that the bride had arrived in Pine Ridge in such a condition as to make any reasonable man doubt the bona fides of the union. He spoke smoothly. He spoke with the practiced authority of a man who has been paid to speak smoothly. When he sat down, Catherine Walker Ashford's mouth moved into something that was almost a smile. Then it was the Walkers' turn. Wyatt rose first. He did not speak smoothly. He spoke the way a man lays a stone wall, fact upon fact upon fact. He had Otto Reiner sworn. The freight man in his thick German accent described 5 years of letter carrying between Hannah May and the mayor's office and named dates and named sums and named men. He had Hannah May sworn. She did not weep. She sat very straight in the witness chair and named in clear, calm sentences every act she had ever committed and every letter she had ever copied, and she handed the index correspondence to the clerk in 4 sealed boxes. She had the carved plaque of her own conscience held up before the room, and it weighed a great deal. Wyatt then called Margaret Ellsworth. The room went very quiet. Catherine Walker Ashford turned her head. The smile was gone. Her gloved hands tightened on her lap. Margaret rose. She walked to the witness chair. She was sworn. She opened the first wooden box. She took out a stack of letters tied with a black ribbon. She said in a clear, cool voice that the narrator will tell you carried to every corner of the hall. These are letters written by my Aunt Catherine Walker Ashford to my late mother Beatrice Ellsworth between 1880 and 1884. They describe in detail an arrangement with Mr. Victor Harlan and Mr. Horace Bradley to acquire by judicial means the property known as Walker Ridge. They name sums, they name dates, they name the judge sitting beside my aunt at this moment. I am giving them to the council. She handed the stack to the clerk. She opened the second box. This is a letter written by my late uncle Edmund Ashford, my aunt's husband, to my mother 3 weeks before his death in 1880. He was a man who on his deathbed found himself unable to leave my aunt's affairs to chance. The letter describes payments made by Mr. Harlan to Mr. Bradley out of Pacific Railroad funds. It describes my uncle's belief that these payments constituted federal crimes. It is in his own hand. I am giving it to the council. She handed the letter to the clerk. She turned finally to her aunt. Aunt Catherine, you taught my mother to keep her mouth closed. You taught her to look the other way. You taught her many things, and most of them she believed. I am the granddaughter of a Quaker woman, ma'am. I was raised on the principle that the truth spoken plain is its own justification. I have spoken plain today. I will not speak again. May God have mercy on you. Good afternoon. She walked back to her seat. The narrator wishes to tell you, friend, that Catherine Walker Ashford did not move for a full 30 seconds. She sat in her red velvet dress with her gloved hands folded, and she did not move. The room did not move with her. Then she very slowly leaned forward, and she put her face in her hands, and she did not weep, but she did not look up again until the proceedings were finished. Harrison Crawford rose next. He walked to the front of the hall. He laid his case file on the table in front of the counsel. He took out one at a time the federal documents he had brought from New York. He laid out the bank drafts. He laid out the postal interceptions. He laid out the affidavits sworn before the federal magistrate. He laid out last the original docket from the trial of Edward Holloway in August of 1880 with Judge Colbert Wheeler's signature on the sentencing order, and beside it the territorial procedure code that required a minimum of 14 days between arrest and sentence in any felony case. Governor, he said, the petitioner's presiding judge, Mr. Wheeler, sentenced an 18-year-old boy to 15 years in the territorial prison 3 days after his arrest in 1880. The sentence was illegal on its face. It was procured by Mr. Harlan and Mr. Bradley as the lever by which they coerced Mistress Hannah Mae Holloway into spying against this household for 5 years. This council should remove Judge Wheeler from these proceedings, vacate the sentence of Edward Holloway, and refer the entire matter to the federal court. I so move. Governor Adams looked at Judge Wheeler. Judge Wheeler looked at the table. Judge Wheeler, you are removed from these proceedings. Bailiff, if you would escort the judge to the holding room until federal marshals are available. Mr. Harlan, you will accompany him. Mayor Bradley, you will join them. He paused. He turned his head. Mistress Walker Ashford, I am sorry, ma'am, for your family, but I am sorrier for the families on the eastern slope of Walker Ridge. You will accompany the gentleman to the holding room. The matter of the will is dismissed. The marriage of Caleb Walker and Rebecca Haywood is hereby acknowledged as lawful and binding under the laws of this territory. This session is adjourned for half an hour. I require coffee. The clerk will remain. So will Mr. Crawford. Good afternoon. He gavelled. He rose. The hall rose with him. Catherine Walker Ashford was led out by a federal marshal. She did not look at her niece. She did not look at her nephew. She walked the way a woman walks, who was suddenly very old and was not so old an hour before. She walked out of the town hall and out of the story, and the narrator will tell you by way of finishing her that she lived 7 more years in a small set of rented rooms in San Francisco and never returned to Colorado as long as she lived. Outside the hall in the cold December afternoon on the same street where Mayor Horace Bradley had thrown a young woman's satchel into the mud, 11 weeks before Caleb Walker stood with his arm around his wife and watched the federal marshals load the mayor and the sheriff and the banker into a wagon for the trip to Denver. The crowd had spilled out onto the street. Some of them were cheering. Most were quiet in the way a crowd is quiet when something large has happened, and they are still measuring the size of it. Lily Haywood stood beside her sister with her small hand in Rebecca's, and she watched the wagon roll away with the men who had laughed at her family in September, and she did not say anything for a long time. Finally, she said in a very small voice, "Becca, are we safe now?" Rebecca knelt down, ignoring the protest of her right knee so that she was at her sister's eye level. "Yes, Lily, we are safe. Forever. For as long as forever lasts in this world. Yes." Caleb knelt beside them. He put his large hand very gently on Lily's shoulder. "Miss Lily, there is a horse at home named Snowdrop who has missed you badly today." "Truly." "Truly. She told me so this morning. She said the small one has been gone too long." Lily laughed. It was a real laugh. The narrator wishes to tell you, friend, that the laugh of a 12-year-old girl on the steps of a small town hall on a December afternoon in Colorado is one of the better sounds this world has produced. There is not enough of it. We should make more. The Walker party went home that night. They stopped only long enough for the men in the bunkhouse and the federal marshal to coordinate the transport of Edward Holloway from the territorial prison, which was set in motion before they left town, and was completed 3 weeks later on the 2nd of January 1886, when Edward, 23 years old, 30 pounds underweight, with a missing front tooth and a quiet voice, stepped down from a stagecoach in Pine Ridge and walked into the arms of his mother for the first time in 5 years and did not let go for a long time. The narrator is going to take you forward now, friend, because the story has done its hard work. And what remains is the slow, steady work that comes after, and that work is best told by skipping lightly over the years. Caleb Walker turned 33 on the 2nd of February, 1886, in his own kitchen with his wife and his sister-in-law and his brothers and Hannah Mae and Edward Holloway, and a small chocolate cake that Lily had baked herself. He blew out the candles. The clause in his father's will was satisfied and dismissed. The valley was theirs. In the spring of 1886, Rebecca and Caleb began to share a room. The narrator will say only that the door closed on the second Saturday of March and that when morning came the next day, things had changed between them in the way they were always going to change, and the change was good. They were married properly and completely, and what passed between them in the privacy of their own room was their own, and the narrator will leave it there. Sarah Walker was born in November of 1887. Jonathan Walker II was born in March of 1889. Silas married Clara Crawford, the Reverend's daughter in the chapel by the river, in the summer of 1889, and their first child, a daughter named Martha for her grandmother, was born in the autumn of 1890. Wyatt, who had returned to Yale to finish his engineering degree in the fall of 1886, became a visiting professor in Denver in 1890 and divided his time between the university and the valley, and was, the narrator is told, the most beloved bachelor uncle in 3 counties. Lily Haywood, 15 years old in 1888, and 16 and 89 and 17 and 90, became the smartest girl in the Walker Ridge schoolhouse. And then when she had outgrown the schoolhouse, the assistant teacher, and then when she had outgrown that, a student at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, paid for by her brother-in-law, where she studied journalism and wrote letters home that made her sister cry with pride. Edward Holloway apprenticed with the carpenter in Pine Ridge, as he had wanted to do at 18, and he did very well at it, and he married a Bromley girl in 1888, and he and his wife and his mother lived in a small house on the Western Road that he built with his own hands, and he carved small wooden animals every Christmas for every child in the valley until his mother died in 1894. And after that, he kept carving them because some habits are also acts of love. Margaret Ellsworth opened a school for orphans in Detroit in the spring of 1887 and ran it for 31 years and never married and never minded. She and Rebecca exchanged letters every month. The letters are, the narrator is told, in the Walker family records to this day. Mayor Horace Bradley was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and served 16 of them before he died of heart failure in his cell. Sheriff Gideon Mercer received 15 years and served all of them. Victor Harlan went to federal prison for 7 years and emerged broken in body and spirit and ran a small tobacco shop in St. Louis for the remainder of his life. Catherine Walker Ashford, as has been said, lived in San Francisco and never came back. Judge Colbert Wheeler was disbarred and died of a stroke in a boarding house in Cheyenne in 1892. The valley was rebuilt and grown and rebuilt and grown. The Cottonwood Pines watershed was protected by a deed restriction filed by Wyatt in 1887 that became over time a model for sustainable timber management across the territory. 200 souls became 300, became 500. The schoolhouse needed a second room. The clinic Caleb had promised was built in the summer of 1887, and a young doctor from Boston named Henry Pemberton came to staff it on the recommendation of Dr. Whitman and stayed for 30 years. The Walker Ridge model became known. Governor Adams cited it in 3 separate addresses to the territorial legislature. In the spring of 1891, on a Saturday afternoon in May, Rebecca Walker stood on the wide porch of the White Pine House and watched her 2 children play in the yard. Sarah was 3.5, Jonathan was 2. Caleb came up the porch steps from the barn with his coat over his arm, and he stopped behind her and he put his hand on her waist very gently. "It has been 5.5 years, Rebecca. I know. You are not sorry." "I am not sorry, Caleb. I have not been sorry for one day." He turned her toward him. He looked at her in the slow, steady way he had always looked at her since the bench in front of the assayer's office, since the wagon on the mountain road, since the kitchen on the night Hannah Mae confessed. There was a girl on a bench in Pine Ridge in September of '85. She had a satchel with mud on it. Do you remember that girl? I do. She came a long way to find this porch. She did. I am very glad she did, Rebecca. She put her hand over his where it rested on her waist. So am I, Caleb. So am I. Mayor Horace Bradley laughed at her in the dirt street that September afternoon. He thought it was a joke. He thought she would die in the snow. He thought the wheel of the world turned only in his direction. The wheel turns slow, but it turns. And 6 years later, on a porch in a hidden valley with two children playing in the spring grass, and a husband's hand on her waist, and a sister at college in Massachusetts, in a community of 500 souls who called her Mrs. Walker, Rebecca Haywood, 29 years old, looked out over the country that had become her country, and she understood in the deep, slow way that real understanding comes that the worst afternoon of her life had also been the day her real life began. A good man her husband's father had carved into a plaque a quarter-century before does not judge a tree by its bark. Sometimes the stone the world throws away is the diamond it was looking for. Sometimes the limping girl on the depot platform is the woman who saves the valley. The narrator hopes you will think on that friend the next time you find yourself ready to throw a stone. Stay close. Keep your fire burning bright. The storm has passed in this house. There will be other storms. There always are. But the house was built well by hands that knew what they were doing, and the words above the fireplace mean what they have always meant, and the people who live there have learned through hard winters and harder questions the only thing that matters in this life. Look at the tree. Look hard. Oh, then choose.